The doctor asked me to choose between killing my father and my husband, since I was the only perfect kidney match for both men who were dying simultaneously. I chose Michael over Dad because we had a nursery half-painted and a future planned, but Dad died 3 months later. Looking at photo albums in his lap. 5 years later, I found a letter in Dad's handwriting addressed to Michael that started with, "By the time you read this, she'll have already chosen you, just like we planned." The doctor asked me to choose between killing my father and my husband. "You're the only perfect match," he insisted. One kidney, 2 people I loved who needed it simultaneously, like some cruel joke. Their conditions were different. Dad's years of untreated high blood pressure had finally caught up after decades of refusing doctor visits, insisting he was fine. My husband Michael's was from an autoimmune disorder that attacked his kidneys without warning. Both were on dialysis now and getting pale and weaker by the minute. Unfortunately, nobody else in either family matched, only me. The donor list was 5 years long, and it was clear by the way they woke up in severe pain that neither of them had 5 years. 2 weeks. The doctor gave me less than 2 weeks to make a decision, emphasizing how each passing day decreased the rate of success. But what sick person could choose between a father and husband? My dad had raised me alone after Mom left, working double shifts at the factory while still making it to every school play. He taught himself to braid my hair from library books, but Michael saved me. He pulled me out of depression when Dad's first health scare hit. He held me through panic attacks, drove Dad to appointments, moved us closer when Dad needed help. He completed us. We even had plans. A nursery half-painted, Dad excited about becoming a grandfather. And now I was left heartbroken because choosing one person meant ending the life of the other. It was impossible. I tried to make it logical at first. I made lists. I knew Dad could live another 15 years with a transplant, but Michael was young and could live 40 more. Dad had lived a full life, and Michael was just hitting his stride. But Dad had given up everything for me, and Michael and I had just started building our future. Round after round, the thoughts went through my head, and nothing good ever came out of it. When they saw how devastated I was, they both tried to make it easier. Dad kept saying, "Choose him, sweetheart. I've had my time. I got to walk you down the aisle." His voice cracked while he squeezed my hand, but Michael said through exhaustion, "He's your dad. He was both parents to you. It's okay. I understand." Each day we went through the same conversations, watching them pretend to be okay with dying, and it ate at my sleep. When I reached out to others for advice, my sister asked, "Well, who can you live without?" I couldn't even answer because the answer was neither. One of them was going to die, and it would be because of me, because I decided that one of them deserved to live more. The night before I had to decide, I found them both writing letters, both of them preparing to die. I chose Michael, not because I loved him more. I don't think I'll ever be able to explain why. Maybe it was seeing him mouth, "It's okay," when he thought I wasn't looking. Maybe it wasn't. I told Dad first, alone in his room. He touched my face with hands that had held mine through every nightmare and said, "I knew you would. You need him." Then quieter, "I got to be your father. That's enough." The surgery went perfectly. Michael healed fast, already making jokes within hours after. Dad came home with us from the hospital, asking to spend his remaining time where he felt most at peace. Michael barely spoke for days, just held Dad's hand during dialysis runs. "You're a good man, son. Take care of her like I couldn't take care of her mother," Dad said in that gruff voice that only made Michael break down harder. Dad passed away 3 months later with photo albums spread across his lap. The funeral, unfortunately, had been rough on us. Everyone blamed us, reminding me again how I'd called my father. I never argued back because I agreed. Part of me really did take him from us too soon. Michael took things much harder. He'd wake up gasping sometimes, apologizing for breathing. I'd tell him it wasn't his fault, and he'd say, "But it is though. I'm here because he's not." We went to therapy, talked to others about survivor's guilt, and while we understood, it didn't make it easier. 5 years have passed, and I still can't explain why I chose him over Dad. People wanted reasons and logic where there wasn't any. Yesterday, I was organizing old medical files when I found something that stopped my heart. A letter in Dad's handwriting, dated the day before my decision. But it wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Michael, and the first line read, "By the time you read this, she'll have already chosen you, just like we planned." My hands trembled as I stared at the letter, reading those words over and over. The paper felt heavy, like it might burn through my fingers. Michael was still in the kitchen, humming while he cooked dinner, completely unaware that our entire life together might be built on a lie. I photographed the letter with shaking hands, then carefully placed it back in the file box, exactly where I'd found it. My mind raced with questions, but I needed time to think before confronting anyone. The smell of garlic and herbs drifted from the kitchen, turning my stomach. At dinner, Michael noticed immediately. He always did. I pushed pasta around my plate while he talked about his coworker getting promoted, studying his face for any sign of deception. Every gesture, every smile felt suspect now. When he reached for my hand across the table, I flinched. He asked if I was okay, concern etching lines around his eyes. I forced a smile and blamed work stress. His face relaxed, and he launched into suggestions for a weekend getaway. The normalcy of it all made me want to scream. That night, I lay beside him listening to his steady breathing. 5 years of marriage, thousands of nights like this, and I'd never once questioned his integrity. The letter's words looped endlessly in my mind, just like we planned. What plan? How long had they been planning? I watched him sleep, searching his peaceful face for answers that wouldn't come. The next morning, I called in sick to work. Michael kissed my forehead before leaving, and I waited until his car disappeared before getting dressed. I drove to Dad's old apartment building, now sold to new owners who'd painted it an ugly beige. Sitting in the parking lot, I remembered how insistent Dad had been that I choose Michael, how ready he'd seemed to die. Had that all been an act? The storage unit smelled like dust and old cardboard. I'd been meaning to go through Dad's things properly, but kept putting it off. Now I tore through boxes with desperate purpose, searching for anything else in his handwriting from that time. Tax returns, birthday cards, grocery lists. Then, buried under photo albums, I found it. His journal from the year before he died. I flipped to the weeks before the surgery decision. The pages were there, but most had been torn out, leaving only jagged edges. One entry remained from 2 months prior. "Michael came by today. Good man. We talked about Sarah's future." My chest tightened. They'd been meeting without me knowing. I texted Michael that I was working late, then drove to the hospital. Dr. Harrison's receptionist said he was in surgery but could see me in 2 hours. I sat in the waiting room, rehearsing questions about the transplant evaluation process, trying to sound casual when my world was falling apart. Dr. Harrison seemed uncomfortable the moment I mentioned in the compatibility testing. He shifted in his chair, avoiding eye contact. When I pressed, he finally admitted the truth. Dad had specifically requested they test Michael first. He'd wanted Michael prioritized if they both matched. The doctor had explained that wasn't how it worked, that the choice would be mine, but Dad had been insistent. In my car afterward, I broke down completely. The grief I'd carried for 5 years transformed into something else entirely. Rage mixed with confusion, betrayal tangled with loss. I called in sick for the rest of the week, knowing I couldn't face anyone while my mind reeled with possibilities. 3 days later, Michael confronted me about missing work. He'd called my office, worried when they said I'd been out all week. I lied, claiming I'd been helping Linda with something, knowing he wouldn't call my estranged sister to verify. His worried expression made me feel both guilty and suspicious. Was his concern genuine, or was he worried I'd discovered something? I found myself studying his every movement over the following days. How he took his coffee with exactly 2 sugars, his morning routine of stretching before his shower, the way he kissed me goodbye, lingering just a second longer than necessary. I searched for evidence of what, exactly? A 5-year deception? Signs of guilt? I didn't even know anymore. I visited Dad's former dialysis center next. The nurse who'd treated him remembered him well, her face softening at his name. She described his positive attitude despite being so sick, how he kept saying his daughter would make the right choice. He seemed so certain about everything, she added, like he knew exactly how it would all work out. At home that evening, I discovered Michael going through my phone while I was in the shower. He confronted me about the photos of Dad's letter I'd forgotten to delete. His face had gone pale, his hands shaking as he held up my phone. He demanded to know what it meant, why I hadn't shown him. Michael swore he'd never seen the letter before, that he had no idea what Dad meant. His voice cracked as he asked if I really thought he'd manipulated me into letting my father die. He was crying now, genuinely devastated by the accusation. But how could I know what was genuine anymore? A week later, we sat on opposite ends of a couch in a marriage counselor's office. Neither of us knew where to begin when she asked what brought us there. The silence stretched until Michael finally spoke, explaining about the letter, about my suspicions. The counselor listened without judgment, then had us do an exercise about trust. During the exercise, Michael admitted he'd always felt guilty about surviving. Why did the dad specifically ask them to test Michael first for compatibility when that's not even how the process works? Something feels off about him meeting with Michael behind her back 2 months before the surgery decision. What exactly were they discussing about her future that she didn't need to know about? He'd wondered if I regretted my choice, if I wished I'd saved Dad instead. The rawness in his voice made me realize I'd never told him I didn't regret choosing him, because the truth was, part of me did regret it. Part of me always had. That night, we slept in separate rooms for the first time since Dad's funeral. I heard Michael crying through the wall but couldn't bring myself to go to him. The space between us felt like an ocean I didn't know how to cross. 2 weeks after finding the letter, I met with an estate attorney to understand the legal aspects. Could Dad have somehow directed his medical decisions to favor Michael? The attorney explained that while unusual, a patient could express preferences that might influence but not determine donor selection. It was a gray area, ethically and legally. Linda finally returned my calls after 2 weeks of messages. Her voice was cold when she answered, but when I asked about Dad planning anything, she went quiet. Then she confirmed my worst fears. Dad had told her at Christmas that he wouldn't let me sacrifice my marriage for him. He'd made her promise not to interfere with my decision, believing Michael was my only chance at happiness after watching my previous relationships fail. I demanded she tell me everything. Linda revealed how Dad had analyzed my past relationships, how he decided I needed someone stable like Michael. The calculation of it all made me sick. My own father had orchestrated his death like some twisted gift. I went to Dad's favorite park, sitting on the bench where we used to feed ducks. I remembered our last real conversation before the surgery, how he'd held my hand and told me I was the best thing that ever happened to him. Now I wondered if even that moment had been manipulation, another move in his careful plan. Michael found me there hours later. Linda had called him, worried about my state of mind. He confronted me about investigating Dad like he was some kind of criminal. Michael insisted Dad had loved me, that they both had, that they both still did. His voice broke on the present tense, and we argued in public, drawing stares from other park visitors. Michael swore he knew nothing about any plan, that Dad had never discussed it with him. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't shake that journal entry about their meeting. How could they have met to discuss my future without some kind of plan forming? We drove home in silence. Michael started packing a bag, saying he'd stay with his mother for a while. He couldn't watch me look at him like he'd called Dad. The quiet devastation in his voice almost broke through my suspicion, but I let him go. The house felt wrong without Michael's presence. I wandered through rooms that suddenly seemed too large, too quiet. His coffee mug still sat by the sink, unwashed. I left it there, unable to touch anything that reminded me of our normal life before the letter. A month passed with Michael at his mother's house. I spent my days digging deeper into Dad's belongings, searching for evidence of the conspiracy I was now certain existed. I found receipts, old calendars, appointment cards. Every interaction between Dad and Michael took on sinister meaning in my mind. One afternoon, I discovered a box of financial records I'd overlooked. Inside were bank statements showing regular withdrawals matching the exact amounts of Michael's student loan payments. The dates went back 3 years before Dad got sick. My stomach churned as I realized Dad had been financially supporting Michael without either of them telling me. I drove to Rebecca's house, determined to confront Michael with this new evidence. Rebecca answered the door, her face drawn with worry. She led me to the living room where Michael sat, looking thinner than I'd ever seen him. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. Michael's reaction to the bank statements was immediate confusion. He explained that Dad had insisted on helping with the loans after learning about Michael's financial struggles. They'd agreed not to tell me because Dad knew I'd object to him spending his retirement savings. The explanation sounded rehearsed, too convenient. Rebecca intervened, revealing that Michael had been having panic attacks since moving in. She described finding him collapsed in the bathroom, hyperventilating, convinced he was dying as punishment for surviving when Dad hadn't. Her words painted a picture of genuine trauma, but I couldn't let go of my suspicions. I left without resolution, driving aimlessly through Columbus streets I'd known my whole life. Everything felt different now, tainted by the possibility that my entire adult life had been orchestrated by my dying father and complicit husband. The therapist called, concerned about our missed appointments. I agreed to an individual session, needing someone objective to help me sort through the chaos in my mind. During the the session, I laid out all the evidence, watching the therapist's face for validation of my suspicions. Instead, the therapist asked probing questions about my guilt over choosing Michael. She suggested that perhaps I was looking for evidence of manipulation because it would be easier to accept than the weight of my own decision. The observation hit too close to home, and I left the session early. Linda showed up at my door unexpectedly, carrying a box of her own. Inside were photos and letters from Dad's house that she'd been holding onto. We spent hours going through them, and a pattern emerged that made my blood run cold. The photos showed Dad and Michael together at various events over the years, baseball games, fishing trips, even a weekend camping expedition I'd known nothing about. In every photo, they looked comfortable together, like genuine friends. But when had they become so close without my knowledge? Linda revealed more details about Dad's planning. He'd made her promise to support my marriage if anything happened to him, even giving her money to set aside for us in case we struggled after his death. The manipulation ran deeper than I'd imagined, extending to my estranged sister. I confronted Dr. Harrison again, this time with a recording device hidden in my purse. I needed concrete proof of what Dad had done. The doctor was more forthcoming this time, perhaps worn down by guilt. He admitted that Dad had been unusually prepared for the transplant scenario, almost as if he'd researched it extensively beforehand. The revelation sent me spiraling. I spent the next week barely sleeping, creating timelines and charts on my living room wall like some detective in a crime show. Every piece of evidence pointed to an elaborate plan orchestrated by my father to ensure I'd choose Michael. Michael's mother called repeatedly, begging me to visit. She said Michael's kidney function was showing signs of stress, likely from the emotional strain. I felt a flash of panic but pushed it down. Was this another manipulation? A way to guilt me into forgiveness? I finally agreed to see him, but only at the hospital during his checkup. Watching the nurses draw his blood, seeing the concern on the nephrologist's face, I felt my resolve waver. The doctor explained that emotional stress could indeed trigger rejection episodes in transplant patients. Michael looked fragile in the hospital bed, hooked to monitors for observation. He reached for my hand, and I let him take it. His skin felt cold, clammy. He whispered apologies for things he swore he didn't do, for knowledge he insisted he didn't have. The nephrologist pulled me aside, explaining that Michael's anti-rejection medication needed adjustment. The stress of our separation was literally culling him. The weight of potentially causing another death crashed over me, even as I wondered if this too was part of some plan. That night, I found myself at Dad's grave for the first time since discovering the letter. I sat on the cold ground, talking to the headstone, demanding answers from someone who could no longer provide them. A groundskeeper found me there hours later, concerned about the woman crying in the cemetery after dark. I returned to the storage unit, determined to find definitive proof. In a box marked taxes, I discovered something that changed everything. Email printouts between Dad and Michael dating back 6 months before the kidney failure. The emails discussed my depression, my work stress, my difficulty maintaining relationships. The intimacy of their correspondence shocked me. Michael had shared details about our marriage that I thought were private. Dad had offered advice, sharing his own regrets about my mother leaving. They'd formed a bond around their mutual concern for me. But when had concern become conspiracy? One email stood out. Michael had written about his fears of losing me to my depression. Dad's response was chilling in its prescience. He promised Michael that he'd make sure we stayed together, no matter what it took. The date was 8 months before his kidneys failed. I drove to Rebecca's house with the emails, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Michael needed to explain this. He couldn't deny written evidence of their relationship, their discussions about my future without my knowledge or consent. Michael's reaction to the emails wasn't what I expected. He didn't deny them or make excuses. Instead, he broke down completely, admitting that yes, he and Dad had become close. Yes, they'd discussed me. But he swore it was out of love and concern, not manipulation. He explained how the friendship had developed. Dad had reached out after noticing Michael's dedication during his first health scare. They'd bonded over their shared love for me, their desire to protect me from the depression that had nearly consumed me. The emails were proof of caring, not conspiracy. But I couldn't accept that explanation. The timing was too convenient, the language too calculated. I left Rebecca's house more convinced than ever that I'd been the victim of an elaborate manipulation that had cost my father his life. Michael's kidney throwing a fit from stress while our detective wife builds conspiracy walls like she's hunting Bigfoot. The man's organ is literally staging a protest about their marriage problems. Talk about your body keeping receipts. The divorce papers I dreaded arrived via courier. Michael wasn't asking for anything, not even the house we'd bought together. The settlement was more than fair, generous even. It felt like another manipulation, a way to make me feel guilty for suspecting him. I met with a divorce attorney to review the papers. She commented on how unusual it was for someone to ask for nothing, especially after a 5-year marriage. She suggested Michael might be acting from guilt, which only reinforced my suspicions. Linda visited again, this time with our aunt who'd flown in from Phoenix. They staged what felt like an intervention, trying to convince me that I was destroying my life over paranoid delusions. But how could I explain the mountain of evidence I'd accumulated? The aunt revealed something that stopped me cold. She'd been in contact with Dad before he died, and he'd made her promise to look after me if anything happened. He'd been making these promises to everyone, creating a network of support for after his death. The planning was even more extensive than I'd realized. I spent hours creating a timeline of Dad's actions in his final year. The pattern was undeniable. He'd systematically prepared everyone in my life for his death, positioning them to support me, with Michael at the center of his plan. It was brilliant and horrifying. 3 months after finding the letter, I attended a support group for transplant families. I needed to hear other stories, to know if what happened to us was unique. The stories I heard there shook me. Families destroyed by guilt, marriages ended by the weight of survival. We weren't special. One woman's story particularly resonated. Her sister had manipulated circumstances to ensure she'd be chosen as the recipient. The family had never recovered, but as she spoke, I realized something crucial. Her sister's manipulation had been selfish. Everything Dad had done had been for me. This realization didn't bring comfort. If anything, it made things worse. How could I be angry at someone who'd sacrificed himself for my happiness? How could I forgive someone who'd taken away my agency in the most important decision of my life? I found myself going through photo albums from before Dad got sick, looking for signs I'd missed, moments when he and Michael's friendship had begun. There were subtle things, background appearances at family gatherings, shared glances, a growing comfort between them I'd been too busy to notice. Michael's kidney function been stabilized, but Rebecca reported he was seeing a grief counselor specifically about Dad's death. She said he talked to Dad's picture every morning, asking for forgiveness for surviving. The image broke something inside me, but I still couldn't bridge the gap between us. I discovered Dad's old computer in the storage unit and managed to guess his password. His search history revealed months of research about kidney transplants, survival rates, and donor selection criteria. He'd known exactly what he was doing, had studied every angle. The emails in his sent folder were even more revealing. He'd reached out to transplant survivors, asking about their experiences. He'd joined online forums for kidney disease patients. He'd been preparing for this scenario long before his kidneys actually failed. One email thread with another patient discussed the ethics of influencing donor choice. Dad had written passionately about a parent's duty to ensure their child's happiness, even at the cost of their own life. The other patient had called him selfish. Dad had agreed but said he'd be selfish for me. I printed everything, adding to my growing collection of evidence. The spare bedroom had become a war room of sorts, walls covered with timelines and connections. Anyone looking at it would think I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. The therapist suggested I was focusing on the conspiracy to avoid processing my grief. She pointed out that I'd never properly mourned Dad because I'd been too consumed with guilt. Now I was channeling that unprocessed emotion into anger and suspicion. During one session, she asked me to consider what I'd do if I could prove definitively that Dad had manipulated everything. Would it change my love for him? Would it bring him back? Would it undo the choice I'd made? The questions haunted me. Linda brought more photos, these from Dad's phone that she'd finally figured out how to access. Among them were pictures of the nursery we'd been painting before he got sick. He'd taken dozens of photos of that half-finished room, as if imagining the grandchild he'd never meet. In his phone's notes app, I found draft letters he'd never sent. Letters to the grandchildren he wouldn't know, to Michael about being a good husband, to me about being strong. The raw emotion in those unsent messages was devastating. This wasn't the writing of a master manipulator, but a frightened father facing death. I visited the dialysis center where Michael now volunteered. I watched from my car as he helped elderly patients, saw the gentle way he adjusted their blankets, held their hands during treatment. He was giving back in the only way he knew how, honoring Dad's sacrifice. One patient saw me and waved me over. She told me how Michael had mentioned me, how proud he was of my strength. She said he'd told her about the impossible choice I'd made and how he tried every day to be worthy of it. Her words made me realize Michael was drowning in guilt too. 4 months after finding the letter, I discovered myself pregnant. The timing felt cosmic, as if Dad was still pulling strings from beyond. The 2 pink lines on the test sent me into a panic. How could I bring a child into this mess? I didn't tell Michael immediately. Instead, I sat with the knowledge alone, wondering if this too was somehow part of Dad's plan. He'd always talked about grandchildren, had been so excited about the nursery. Had he known something I didn't? The pregnancy forced me to confront hard truths. I couldn't raise a child in a shrine to conspiracy theories. I couldn't let my paranoia poison another generation. But I also couldn't simply forget what I'd discovered. I made an appointment with a new therapist, one who specialized in complicated grief. She helped me understand that Dad's actions, whether manipulative or not, had come from a place of profound love. He'd faced an impossible situation and had tried to control the only thing he could, ensuring I wouldn't be alone. Slowly, I began to dismantle the evidence wall in the spare bedroom. Each piece of paper I took down felt like letting go of something. Not forgiveness exactly, but acceptance. Dad had made choices for me. Now I had to make choices for my child. I finally told Michael about the pregnancy during a neutral meeting at a coffee shop. His reaction was immediate and overwhelming. He broke down completely, joy and sorrow mixing in equal measure. He asked if he could touch my still flat stomach, and I let him. We began talking, really talking, for the first time in months. Not about the letter or the conspiracy, but about the future. About whether we could rebuild something from the wreckage of our mistrust. About whether our child deserved parents who were together. Michael revealed his own investigation during our separation. He'd gone through every memory, every interaction with Dad, trying to understand if he'd been an unwitting accomplice to manipulation. The guilt of not seeing it, of not protecting me from it, had been eating him alive. We attended couples therapy together, working through the layers of guilt, suspicion, and grief that had accumulated between us. The therapist helped us see that we'd both been victims of Dad's love, if that's what it was. We'd both been robbed of agency in different ways. Gradually, I moved some of Michael's things back into the house. Not everything at once, just essentials. His coffee mug by the sink, his pillow on the bed, small steps towards something that might resemble normal, though we both knew normal was gone forever. The pregnancy progressed, and with it came a new perspective. Feeling the baby move inside me, I understood something about Dad's desperation to protect me. The fierce, overwhelming need to ensure your child's happiness, even at terrible cost. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but I began to understand it. We decided to keep the house but renovate completely. The nursery would be finished, but in different colors. We needed to build something new, not continue what had been started before everything changed. It felt symbolic, a fresh start built on a complicated foundation. During the renovation, we found more letters hidden in the walls. Dad had apparently hidden them everywhere, like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale. Each one revealed more of his planning, his desperate love, his determination to save us both in the only way he could conceive. I found another letter tucked inside Dad's old fishing tackle box, this one addressed to both of us. The paper was yellowed, dated years before his kidneys failed. He wrote about watching Michael and me at family gatherings, seeing how we balanced each other. The letter detailed his fears about leaving me alone if something happened to him, his hope that Michael would be there. This wasn't a death plan, but a father's ongoing worry. Michael and I started meeting weekly at the same coffee shop, neutral ground where we could work through revelations without the weight of our shared home. During one meeting, he brought his own collection of Dad's letters, ones Dad had sent him over the years, birthday cards, thank you notes for helping with house repairs, casual correspondence between a father figure and the man who'd married his daughter. The therapist suggested we create a timeline together, mapping out Dad's actions without judgment. We spread papers across her office floor, organizing events chronologically. The pattern that emerged wasn't conspiracy, but escalation. Talk about renovation therapy. Most couples just argue over paint colors, but these two are finding love letters hidden in the walls like some kind of emotional treasure hunt while pregnant and processing conspiracy theories. Dad's normal protective instincts had intensified as his health declined, transforming natural natural concern into desperate action. Rebecca joined us for several sessions, providing her perspective on the months before Dad's diagnosis. She revealed that Dad had asked her advice about retirement planning, wanting to ensure I'd be financially secure. He'd been thinking about his mortality long before his kidneys failed, making practical preparations that later morphed into manipulation. I discovered Dad's medical records from his primary care physician, showing years of warnings about his blood pressure. He'd ignored recommendations for medication, lifestyle changes, regular monitoring. The stubbornness that called him was the same trait that drove him to control the aftermath. Understanding this connection helped me see him as human, rather than puppet master. Linda and I spent afternoons sorting through Dad's belongings properly this time, not searching for evidence but preserving memories. We found his collection of my school papers, every report card saved, every art project treasured. Among them were essays I'd written about wanting to be a doctor, helping people. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Michael's kidney function remained stable with adjusted medication, but the scare had changed us both. We attended his medical appointments together, no longer taking his health for granted. The transplant coordinator mentioned that emotional stress was one of the leading causes of complications in transplant recipients. We couldn't afford another separation. During a particularly difficult therapy session, Michael admitted he'd suspected Dad might try to influence my decision, but had been too afraid to voice concerns. He'd wanted to live so desperately that he'd remained silent. The confession initially reignited my anger, but I recognized my own complicity. I'd chosen him partly because it was easier than watching him die young. We decided to visit other transplant recipients together, seeking perspectives beyond our own trauma. One couple shared how the donor's family had initially blamed them for surviving when their loved one hadn't. Time had softened the anger, but the guilt remained. They'd learned to honor the sacrifice by living fully, not just surviving. The pregnancy reached the second trimester, and we learned the baby was healthy. During the anatomy scan, Michael held my hand as we watched our son move on the screen. The technician pointed out his strong heartbeat, his perfect little fingers. This life existed because of Dad's sacrifice and our choice to try again despite everything. I returned to work part-time, needing structure beyond investigation and therapy. My colleagues welcomed me back carefully, aware of our separation, but not the reasons. The normalcy of spreadsheets and meetings provided relief from the emotional chaos at home. Michael supported the decision, understanding I needed something separate from our complicated history. We attended a grief support group specifically for families affected by organ donation. The stories varied, but themes repeated. Impossible choices, survivor's guilt, family fractures. The facilitator, herself a kidney recipient, emphasized that there were no perfect outcomes in these situations, only different forms of loss. Michael started writing letters to Dad, not sending them anywhere but needing to express thoughts he'd never voiced. He shared some with me, raw admissions of guilt, gratitude, anger at being put in an impossible position. The letters revealed depths of emotion he'd hidden while trying to be strong for me. Linda helped us paint the nursery, choosing soft greens instead of the blues we'd started 5 years ago. As we worked, she shared her own guilt about blaming me for choosing Michael. She'd been angry at losing Dad, but also relieved she hadn't faced the choice. The admission opened conversations we'd avoided for years. I found myself returning to Dad's favorite fishing spot regularly, not seeking answers but finding peace. The water moved the same way it had when he'd taught me to cast, patient with my tangled lines. Sometimes Michael joined me, and we'd sit in silence, connected by loss and the life growing inside me. The therapist introduced the concept of completing our relationship with Dad, not through forgiveness necessarily, but through acceptance of what was. We wrote letters to him expressing everything, the love, the anger, the confusion. We burned them together in our backyard, watching smoke carry our words skyward. Michael's mother organized a small memorial on what would have been Dad's birthday. She'd done this every year, but this was our first time attending together since finding the letter. Seeing others who'd loved Dad, hearing their memories untainted by manipulation, reminded us who he'd been beyond his final acts. During the third trimester, I developed gestational diabetes, requiring careful monitoring. The irony of kidney disease affecting pregnancy wasn't lost on us. Michael managed my testing schedule with the same dedication he'd shown Dad during dialysis. We were learning to care for each other differently, shaped by trauma but not defined by it. We decided to keep Dad's letter, not hidden but not displayed either. It lived in a safety deposit box with other important documents, a piece of our history that couldn't be erased. Someday we'd have to decide whether to share it with our son, but that decision could wait. The nursery neared completion as my due date approached. We'd installed a rocking chair near the window, the same spot where Dad used to sit during his final months. Michael often found me there, talking to my belly about his grandfather, trying to explain a man too complex for simple stories. Labor began 3 weeks early, sending us rushing to the hospital in the middle of the night. The contractions intensified quickly, leaving no time for the careful birthland we'd created. Michael stayed by my side, coaching me through breathing exercises we'd practiced, his steady presence anchoring me through the pain. Franklin arrived just as the sun rose, screaming and perfect. The nurse placed him on my chest, and I saw Dad's eyes looking back at me, the same determined gaze that had orchestrated so much. Michael cried openly, touching our son's tiny fingers, whispering promises I knew he'd keep. The pediatrician noted Franklin's excellent health, joking about his strong grip and loud voice. We didn't mention the grandfather he'd never meet, or the sacrifice that made his existence possible. Those stories would come later, when he could understand complexity beyond good and evil. Recovery proved challenging, complicated by the emotional weight of bringing life into a family marked by death. Michael took leave from work, managing night feeding so I could rest. We moved through those early weeks in a sleep-deprived haze, focused on immediate needs rather than past grievances. Rebecca visited daily, bringing meals and holding Franklin while we showered or napped. She'd become the parental figure we both needed, offering guidance without judgment. Her presence reminded us that family could be chosen and rebuilt, not just inherited and lost. Linda surprised us by taking time off work to help. She'd been distant since Dad's death, but Franklin's arrival shifted something. Watching her hold her nephew, seeing Dad's features in his tiny face, bridged gaps that words couldn't cross. We were building new relationships around shared love rather than shared loss. The pediatrician cleared Franklin for visitors at 1 month old. We hosted a small gathering, introducing him to the extended family who'd supported us through everything. Everyone commented on his resemblance to Dad, the same stubborn chin and expressive eyes. Michael and and I exchanged glances, acknowledging the bittersweet observations. We established new routines around Franklin's needs, finding rhythm in the chaos of new parenthood. Night feedings became opportunities for quiet conversation, discussing everything from diaper brands to our hopes for his future. The mundane concerns provided relief from years of heavy emotional processing. Michael returned to work when Franklin was 6 weeks old, anxious about leaving us but needing the normalcy. I spent days learning our son's different cries, his preferences, his emerging personality. He was calm like Michael, but determined like Dad, a combination that both comforted and concerned me. We started couples therapy again when Franklin was 2 months old, recognizing that parenthood had surfaced new dynamics. The therapist helped us navigate how our trauma affected our parenting choices, our fears about Franklin's health, our determination to be honest with him about his history. Franklin smiled for the first time during a middle-of-the-night feeding, gas or genuine emotion unclear. Michael and I both claimed credit, arguing playfully about who'd earned that first smile. It felt like a glimpse of who we might become, parents capable of joy despite everything. We took Franklin to Dad's grave when he was 3 months old, introducing grandfather to grandson across the divide. Michael spoke quietly about Dad's sacrifice, promising to raise Franklin with the same devotion Dad had shown me. I added my own promises about honesty and agency, lessons learned through pain. The day before what would have been Dad's 68th birthday, we received a package from his lawyer. Inside were savings bonds Dad had purchased for future grandchildren, dated years before his diagnosis. The gesture felt like a final message, love expressed through practical provision, planning that preceded manipulation. We decided to start a small memorial fund in Dad's name, supporting families facing impossible transplant decisions. The fund wouldn't make choices easier, but might ease financial burdens during medical crises. It felt like a way to honor Dad's memory while acknowledging the complexity of his actions. Something feels calculated about how the dad ignored years of medical warnings about his blood pressure. Makes me wonder if he was already setting up this whole situation long before anyone realized what was happening. Franklin grew stronger daily, meeting milestones with the determination I recognized from Dad. He rolled over early, vocalized constantly, demanded attention with the same intensity Dad had shown in his final months. We were raising Dad's grandson, carrying forward traits that had both saved and scarred us. As Franklin approached 4 months old, Michael's annual transplant check showed continued stability. The relief felt different now, not just about Michael's survival, but about Franklin having his father. We celebrated quietly, aware of the ongoing vigilance required to maintain his health. We began telling Franklin stories about his grandfather, simple tales initially about fishing trips and factory work. As he grew, we'd add complexity, explaining how love could manifest in beautiful and terrible ways. For now, he listened to our voices, content without understanding. The house felt different with Franklin's presence, his nursery complete where it had stood half-finished for years. We built something new from the wreckage of our past, imperfect but genuine. Dad's manipulation had nearly destroyed us, but we'd chosen to rebuild rather than remain broken. Looking at Michael holding our son, I understood that Dad had been both right and wrong. Michael was my future, but not because Dad had chosen him. We'd chosen each other repeatedly through betrayal, suspicion, and reconciliation. That choice, made daily, mattered more than the orchestrated one 5 years ago. Franklin slept peacefully in his crib as we watched from the doorway, still amazed by his existence. He represented hope we hadn't dared imagine during those dark months of investigation and separation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight we were simply parents, grateful for the complicated path that had led us here. Time really does fly when you're out here solving mysteries and making babies, multitasking at its finest. Thanks for letting me crack wise with you today, folks. Catch you next time. Subscribe for more content like this.